You may start, Professor Ramogale.
Can we start now? Okay, wonderful. Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session. My name is Marcus Ramogale. I'm the chair of this session. The theme for the session is universities and the new technology moment and society. We have two speakers who are going to present. But before the two speakers, we'll have Professor Marwala to introduce the session. Just to remind our speakers, because my main duty is to manage time and to ensure that the session flows smoothly. For the main speakers, Professor Louw and Professor Anderson, I will do is just before your time, you've got 20 minutes to speak. So 5 minutes before your time is up, I will switch on my video. That will be a signal to you that you've got 5 minutes to wrap up. And for the respondents, we have 8 minutes to speak. And then we have another 2 minutes for questions. So within those 8 minutes, I'll give you about 5 minutes to make your presentation. And then as we go towards the to the 8th minute, so maybe 3 minutes before your end of your part, I'll also switch on my video, and that will be a signal for you that you've got 3 minutes to wrap up. I'll do the same even for Professor Marwala, the 3-minute signal. I don't want to interject as colleagues are speaking. I'll just use the video as a signal. So whilst you're presenting, my video will be off, and if you see my face, just know that your allocated time is just about to come to an end. We look forward to a very, very interesting session. As I've indicated, we've got two speakers, and then after the two speakers, we'll have a panel discussion by 3 respondents. I'll introduce the respondents at the right time. With this introduction, let me once again welcome you, and then hand over to Professor Marwala to introduce the session. Over to you, Professor Marwala.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramogale, and all the panelists and participants in this session. The world, as we once knew it, is changed forever. This shift is not a once-off defined just by a pandemic, but rather a paradigm shift. Of course, the concept of a paradigm shift is a loaded word that was introduced into the English dictionary by Thomas Kuhn to explain some of the greatest scientific revolutions. The economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has most accurately been felt in the sphere of unemployment and the rapid digitization processes and operations. While the fourth industrial revolution has meant that these changes were to some extent inevitable, but the speed and breadth at which they needed to occur as a result of the pandemic could not have been anticipated. Of course, this is ushering another revolution. This is what is called economic singularity, where, like the concept of singularity as explained in physics, it becomes increasingly difficult to know what is going to happen to the world. Against this backdrop, universities are forced to pause and reevaluate their roles and their approaches. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted conventional and traditional modes of teaching and learning in higher education. This has had a powerful effect on the higher education landscape, signaling a number of important changes that will likely hold into the so-called post-pandemic future, which many people believe is going to be full of many other pandemics. Today, with the hindsight of lessons learned, we can begin conversations on how we harness the benefits of technology without displacing the important physical spaces of a traditional university. Universities as communities are critical spaces for learning and remain pivotal to making higher education more than just buildings. Of course, I feel very privileged today to be joined by a formidable panel of speakers who will locate universities in this new technological moment, and in a society that has undergone and continues to undergo massive changes. I'm particularly looking forward to the first session, which will be comprised of Professor Louw, the Vice-Chancellor of Torrens University in Australia, and Ms. Nompendule Tobile Mkashwa, the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education, Science and Technology. Of course, this will also be followed by other responses to this very important topic. Professor Benjamin Anderson, Mr. Phila Sithole, Mr. Boeta Pretorius, and of course, under the leadership of Professor Marcus Ramogale, we are actually going to have a pleasant session. So we have spoken of reimagining the learner and the university of the future for quite some years now. We now find ourselves in the midst of this fast-changing world. The pandemic has demonstrated that this is indeed the direction we should be heading in. And in my opinion, this era will require us to reimagine a university in different forms. Universities are increasingly going to take the shape of technological objects. Universities are going to become technological objects, just like Facebook or Twitter and so on and so forth. Secondly, universities are going to be a hub of innovation. As universities continue to grapple with the problems that are facing our society, they will have to increasingly take the form of innovation centers. Universities will need to be integrated into our society. And our society is no longer in the physical space. Much of it now is in the digital or the so-called cyber world. And our ability of our universities to be able to navigate into this digital or cyberspace will require the reimagining of a university in different forms. Universities shall increasingly become evolving organisms. And the reason for that is because the only constant that we are going to experience in the next few years is actually change. And I'm reminded of the great Greek scholar who once said, no one can ever cross the same river twice. Because when that person comes back, it is a different river altogether, because the water that one encountered before is gone. So this concept of creating an adaptive, evolving, living organism called a university is going to preoccupy leaders in higher education for a long time, and it requires a different type of leadership. to emerge in higher education. I thank you very much. Ngiyabonga, kiyalibuwa bayadangi.
Thank you, Professor Marwala, for that introduction. We are good to go now. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to make one correction. We were just informed before we started that one of our speakers will not be able to join us, and that is Ms. Mkachwa, the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Higher Education, Science and Technology. So in her place, we are going to have a presentation by Professor Anderson. So we'll start with Professor Louw. Professor Louw is the Vice-Chancellor of Torrens University in Australia and also a South African. So we are very happy that he is joining us from down under to share with us his perspective on this particular theme. Professor Anderson, if I can just, Professor Louw, I'm sorry, if I can just remind you, you've got 20 minutes. And when you're left with 5 minutes, I will switch on my video to give you a signal that you've got those 5 minutes to wrap up. Ladies and gentlemen, for more information about Professor Louw, I want to refer you to the conference booklet, which can be viewed or downloaded from the conference landing page. We will then switch the order of the speakers. So our first speaker then will become Professor Anderson, who originally was going to be one of the respondents, and he has kindly accepted to step in when we learn to that Ms. Mkachwa will not be with us. Professor Anderson is the executive chair of the Da Vinci Institute. And Professor Anderson, I also wish to remind you that you've got 20 minutes. And 5 minutes before your time is up, I will switch on my video, and that will be a signal for you to wrap up. Over to you, Professor Anderson.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. What I would like to share some ideas with today is around the construct of technology versus humanity in the context of the theme of the conference, which is the engaged university. And I particularly want to share some ideas and ask some questions around the algo-algorithmic dance and how that plays into the technology and humanity interface. Now, the first thing that I would think we could ask is what is out there? What are the underlying constructs of a technology-enhanced, centered university context, human-centered university context? What is the underlying constructs in that technology-enhanced and human-centered university context? Well, the first one is that we have become much more aware of reality being a coded reality, where everything is appreciated and has value. In the coded reality, we are not worried about power struggles. We are not concerned about what is more important and what is less important. We are not playing the one academic field or discipline off against the others. We are accepting that everything and anything is appreciated and has value. That's what the technology-enhanced, human-centered reality of the world shows me. Secondly, that's positively so that in this reality, one of the other grounding constructs is that there's limited human interface, allowing for unlimited combinations and variation. we as a people, for some reason, have the tendency to overthink, to overdo, to overrespond more often than not. But one of the underlying constructs is that we are not needed to do this to the extent we've done it. We don't need to boast about the 14 to 19-hour daily routine that we have at the office. We don't need to tell people how burned out we are because we are so involved and we must do so many things. Who in any case decided that in typical Western fashion, the 8 to 5 job and the job description is what we ought to do as knowledge workers going into a new era. I can imagine with limited human interference as a requirement, you and I could do much more. We can have more time out, we can see more and reflect more of what can be done and what is possible, and not be so hooked into our jobs, and more so even as academics, be so focused singularly on our discipline that we actually can't see that our discipline is just part of a coded reality of multiple other disciplines. I'm amazed if you look at the Louw viaduct in the southern France, it's much more a symbol of a human engagement than it's a symbol of an engineering and architectural masterpiece. If you look at the transdisciplinarity around that Louw viaduct and all the engagements, it's not about a single discipline anymore. The third underlying construct for me is the matter of increased energy flow that this technology enhanced and human-centeredness may bring. And particularly energy flow as far as it's about agreement and disagreement versus social interactions. Now we can continue, even as we are mostly doing now, the coordinated energy flow stream, where there's somebody in the center and orchestrates all the people around them and tell them what to do and make them feel important. The priest took that role, politicians are taking it, CEOs take it, but so are academics taking it. I often hear students telling me as a psychologist that they struggle to continue their PhD because the professor wants his or her voice at the center of their thesis. That coordinated energy flow is still possible because it's not necessarily wrong, it's just restrictive. But you can move to a more wider engagement where the flow between agreement and disagreement and social interaction becomes more open-ended and create a collaborative engagement, where collaborations are becoming more prominent. We hear universities talking in the last 5 years a lot about collaborations. But what I do find interesting, that those collaborations are often built around individuals. It's Professor Langer, or it's Professor Tilburg, or it's Professor Anderson, or it's Professor Louw, or whoever, that drives that collaboration with the institution and interinstitutional. But when that person passes, often those collaborations become stale and don't have the same energy flow again. Very simple, because it's built too often around a individual. And then you get the third energy flow pattern, which is the cooperative pattern, where we are all knowledge workers in a circle and where our only intention is to give. We've got no expectation to be powerful or to be told how beautiful and wonderful our contributions are. No. We're part of a knowledge system where each have the intent to share, so I can see what I can give, and you can see what you can give, and collectively, we cooperatively engage. So the increased energy flow may be a combination of the coordinated, collaborative, and cooperative patterns, as Jaak has stipulated it in his work on organizational dynamics. But I think in a technology enhanced and a human-centered university, the ideal of a cooperative engagement, where students and colleagues and community workers become equals, provides great opportunity for the engaged university. The third underlying construct is that of the possibility of open spaces, the notion of interconnectedness, and it relates in some way to the discussion around cooperative engagement, but interconnectedness, that we become aware how much are we part of how something much bigger than what we are. And this interconnectedness is not just in terms of humans or the human relationship to technology, but it's about the whole cosmic reality. How aware am I that I'm part of something bigger and something beyond just being a human? What is my engagement with the ecological system? How do I respond to the ecosystem around me? In a discussion with the shaman in the Andes, he made an interesting comment and said, if you want to be real in the now, therefore, if you want to really be interconnected, you should elevate your mind to that of the level of the condor, so that you can see tomorrow rolling in and yesterday rolling out at the same time. To what extent are you and I, as academics of a beautiful space called the university, aware that our brain has the capacity to go beyond time and beyond linear engagements? So colleagues, these are four of what I see as critical underlying constructs which the development of technology with people have made possible for us. We're already seeing some of this happening. So how do we now take that further? Well, in addition to the underlying constructs, I would like to talk a little bit about the megatrends that are requiring a dance between technology and humanity. So what are the things, and I must give credit to Geert Leonard, who has beautifully articulated more particularly the trends that have been emerging over the last 10, 15 years. Things that are not out there, but that should actually be in here, because we should already be part of that, especially in the context of an emerging fifth industrial revolution, where the dance between the algorithm and the androrhythm, the technology and the humanity, is becoming unnegotiable and non-negotiable. I'm not going to deal too much in all the detail, but let's look at digitization. I mean, we've known as academics even more so, and as business people, the impact of digitization on everything, on music, on logistics, on banking, on healthcare, on agriculture. And we already see in some of those digitized contexts how technology and humanity are playing, are dancing together. In some ways, we're not getting it right, because there's still an overemphasis on the one and not the other. Mobilization, where technology is moving closer to us. We all had desktops, then we put it in our hand, it's now on our wrist, it's coming to our face. The AR, VR, and the brain computer, the BCI interfaces. Again, how are we going to dance with the technology as humans? Screenification, we went on interface revolutions, which were on paper to screen, to the telephone calls, to video calls. I mean, who could have imagined that we were globally engaged the way we are even 2 years ago, with such ease and comfort? Disintermediation is an important or critical megatrend in my world, where it's about cutting out the middleman. We know what happened to Apple and Spotify and Baidu and YouTube and new developments thereafter, and how the record companies earned all the income and not the artist, and how that space has been democratized. But I'm curious to know, do you and I as academics consider, with this technology human interface, What is the possibility of disintermediation for us universities? Will society need the university as it is? We can have great discussions around what COVID has shown us in this regard. There's to a large extent already some disintermediation happening. Could you imagine all the infrastructural developments that people made in buildings and in other facilities that constitutes the university of the past, poised now in a context where there may not be a need for that, if we really want to do the dance between technology and people. Robotization, where everything is converging into some spectacular creations, and I'm not going to go into more detail there. Transformation, if you think from a university academic point, where something becomes something else, where it's beyond change and innovation. Some car manufacturers now are not seeing themselves and positioning themselves for the future as car manufacturers, but as mobile manufacturers. What is the transformation discussion? I see it on the agenda, and I'm curious to know, are we going to become something else, or are we just tweaking it and saying, well, we've got our comfort zones, we must not change this thing too much? Transformation is beyond change and beyond innovation. Intelligization, where it's from being disconnected to being connected by sensory networks and global device grids. AlphaGo, you may know about the self-learning computer who mastered the complex ancient game, Chinese game of Go. Because why? It understands its surroundings without being tainted, without being influenced negatively, if I may, and thereby taking a more correct course of action to solve a problem. Now, people can have heated debates around these, arguing, but we need the human interface. Let's have the human interruption here. I don't think intelligization will assume that there is not human interface. It's how are we going to dance with this? What do I learn from AlphaGo? Am I curious to understand what I can learn? I go to a mentor to tell me how do I become more emotionally intelligent? Well, what do I learn from AlphaGo? Automation, it's all linked about the hyper efficiency of humans with machine learning. And it does not need to be, as I said in my introduction, that academics in particular need to lose their jobs or feel less important. The question is how to become hyper efficient. Virtualization, creating a digital version of everything possible. We moved from routers to hosting data in the cloud to software-defined network, SDN networks. And there's new developments there also. And then anticipation, where computers anticipate our needs before we know what we need. Google Now and Google Home are typical IDAs. So these, ladies and gentlemen, are just a few examples of megatrends. Now, taking into account the grounding constructs, as well as the referred to megatrends, there are a group of academics at the Da Vinci Institute who have developed a conceptual framework to try to facilitate this algo and algorithmic dance. And I'm not going to go into much detail, except saying that it's trying to build a relationship between the management of technology, the management of people, the management of innovation within a systemic context. And if we do that as per the frame, you get a more aligned, a more engaged, and a more agile work environment. If the engaged university in this context can therefore develop the relationship between the human interface and the management of innovation, we will really go a far way to facilitate an algo and algorithmic dance for the future. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Professor Anderson, for that interesting presentation. We'll deal with any questions later during the panel discussion. Thank you very much. We will now move to the next speaker. I'm told Professor Louw is now ready to present. Can I get that confirmation, Professor Louw?
Yes, I am back in. Let us see if it works. Otherwise, we will go for plan B. Is it possible that there we are?
Okay. All right, over to you, Professor Louw. You've got 20 minutes for your presentation.
Chair, I'm going to, for the moment, just start like that. And then I will see if we can get going. I will go on presentation mode. I just don't want to run the risk that we get stuck again. Chair, thank you very much. What I want to talk about is the university towards engagement in a digitized world, meeting the fourth industrial revolution. And I think, as is very clear from our first two speakers, that we're living in an era of very drastic change. So no one argues that point anymore. But I think what we need to understand is what is the real nature of the debate and the core of the argument. We're talking about an academic culture that is steeped in reflection and teaching is being disrupted and reconstructed. But what's the crux of it? The crux of it is that we're talking about a networked world, 24/7, 365, co-creators and co-learners. In other words, the university moving into a space where it has to deal with co-creators, co-learners in the whole process, and that leads us into a new definition of the situation. So if we look at the university in this context, then the university is both there and not there at the moment. Gramsci's idea of old systems and institutions that ceased working, the old order is already collapsed, but no new order is yet in place. Now that's a very drastic statement, and I know that we should be careful in using that. But the point is just this: where are we at the moment? The interesting matter that we have to understand is that the social impact, society at large, does not accept the fact that the university should abdicate its role. There's still an expectation around the role of university, the visibility, the presence, and the nature of what they do. And for that reason, we should be sensitive, accepting the fact that some of the authors argue that we've seen these things before. We've seen these changes with political changes. We've seen these changes with the new role in post-colonial international development operators, new liberal efforts around the role of the university. And now we're experiencing the whole engagement drive, as well as the technology explosion, as well as COVID-19 as specific drivers that impacts the university. So why reimagine? Everything is changing around us. So we should understand that in the context that is changing, we must ask the question about the position, the role, and value, the importance of. But the university accepted as a major site of culture practice, of identity formation, of knowledge formation and dissemination, of symbolic control, if you want to, of multi-purpose networking, collaboration, and engagement. So the university still brings this binding into the broader environment around creating knowledge, engaging around knowledge, and play a definitely important role. So if we look at the current context, and we have the debate around the fourth industrial revolution, we must understand what are those things really driving us. And it's possible to get into all sorts of esoteric debates around this whole thing, but I think we need to be very practical, very firm in terms of our understanding of what it is that we have to understand on a day-to-day basis. The new dimensions of technology and the convergence currently taking place, the fusion between the biological, the physical, and the digital, the fact that it impacts all disciplines. In other words, how do we define the disciplines in the context of research, in the context of teaching and learning, etc. The impact of big data and everything that goes with that, the integration and the automation, and the cyber-physical system going with that. New capacity in terms of the systems, operations, manufacturing, predictability, and the machine that takes over human functions, forcing the human being and people to think again about its own creativity and its own role, to understand the value and the contribution of technology. And then the massive amounts of data that enable machine learning, and as I said, they enable the cyber-physical system. So these are the practical things happening on a day-to-day basis that we need to understand. what is critical and probably an aspect that we don't talk about enough is that in the second machine age, the automation of knowledge as against the first one, manual labor and physical strength. In other words, the fact that we're moving into an era where knowledge in itself now becomes the product of entities that we cannot necessarily control in the way that we did in the past. Accept the issue around workers that may be displaced. Accept the idea of new functions and roles and new opportunities. New goods and services will threaten established orthodoxy. So the world and the redefinition of the context, we must understand that dynamic as much as we understand service functions and businesses will continue its own drive to understand better and definitely control, have more surveillance and have more management of, yes, their robots and also the people. So if we look at the impact of that, the shift from the third industrial revolution about digitizing our infrastructure to the fourth industrial revolution about reconstructing our infrastructure to be intelligent, computers as the fourth IR computational forms with which we can interact, and the automated production in the third IR and the fourth IR provides intelligent automation where machines can repair and develop themselves. While the digital revolution 3IR based on digital computing, and we now see the blend of digital computing with quantum computing. Now, these things may sound like almost general information nowadays, but it seems to me in our argument, this is what we must understand as the drivers impacting the nature of our world. The advancement of technology enable human capacity to achieve more. Just a few ideas about that. The integrated systems processes, broader networks, the internationalization that transcends the local, and fundamental to that, the way in which we live and work is changing. So in other words, information is everywhere. It enables new roles, new relations, new patterns. It creates short-termism, efficiency and entrepreneurial demands existing, and then the demand to alternative considerations of contracting, evaluating, remunerating to manage a new world with a new dynamic. So we can carry on and we can look at all these dimensions. The point is just this, that we should not accept that where technology is at its ultimate is necessarily where we should define ourselves at the moment. We should understand the context very well in which we're functioning. So the rapidly changing actors in resource mobilization force flexibility and definitely create a labor market that looks totally different, where a highly skilled minority enjoys strong bargaining power and the low skilled do not. Questions that we should ask in this whole process is who controls this technology, who manages the power relations, and how do we ensure equitable access? How do we make sure that people and their well-being remain centered in this process? Information all over. New definition of openness and engagement. New technologies marks a shift to different forms of engagement with academic knowledge and beyond the academy. And then we must accept that existing instruments of pedagogy lost some of its utility value. So we must clearly understand that this environment is moving faster than what we always want to accept, but it has got some very hard and specific realities. So the transformation of the world of work, if we talk about what is happening there, is that we should look at the impact of technology and the impact of its convergence that creates a network of interaction, interdependence, and synergy that drive the whole economic, social, political processes, etc. This directly impacts the way in which production, distribution, in other words, enabling the multidimensional relations that reinvent itself. If we then look at the impact we've got the debate going, accepting basic things like that we will not be able to foresee and imagine even the dynamics in the next 10 years around creation of jobs, functions, etc. And the fact that jobs that we're looking at into the future will have a total different content and constitution. So key aspects in the world of work that we must understand is the importance for soft and human skills together with technical and professional skills. The decline of traditional roles in the middle of the skills and learning range, and many jobs will not disappear, but only change drastically. New jobs will fill the middle ground, and technology will pervade every work environment. And then understand every security implies then individual responsibility, lifelong learning, horizontal career progression. In other words, people move around into new jobs, new environments, and new integrated experiential learning to prepare our workers of tomorrow. I'm just putting that up to give you an indication. The moment you start to unpack the world of work, and you look at critical competencies, critical thinking, innovative approach, the fact that we talk about new knowledge, a new type of knowledge, we talk about the context, and what it looks like, and specifically understanding and have sensitivity for it, the risk and change readiness, as well as systems capacity, sitting in this context of a lot of indicators and variables that continuously create an environment that we need to understand. The implications of the numbers of people across the world that will be influenced. If we talk about 395.3 million people in China. Now, I know that there's a lot of debate around the position of McKinsey and other larger entities that argue these data, but fact is we should still take note of that and understand that we're not talking about an entity that can be contained. We're talking about a global drive, and I agree with Professor Marwala that we're talking about a paradigm shift in this sense. So positioning the university in this context is then where we need to focus on. No argument about that. The awareness around the fourth industrial revolution, and of course the fifth and the sixth that follow on that, elevated the persuasion amongst governments, people accepting that we should be part of this. Higher education is forced to interpret and understand this new world to fulfill its purpose. So it must definitely make sure that it focuses on three critical aspects. How do we talk about curriculum in this environment? How do we address the new world of work, its rules and content? How do we support equal access to new opportunities? And how do we prepare people for the new social and economic context? And of course, when I talk about curriculum here, it sits on sound research and knowledge creation. Then the integration of new technology into the process of learning and into the process of functioning of both the university in terms of its operational aspects, as well as the learning aspect. In other words, a new definition of the business model, and then definitely the relationship with its context. Moving away from the old idea of selective engagement, selective involvement, now we're talking about an integrated approach much wider. So it is evident that universities are shifting from the ideal of knowledge-intensive entities of the 20th century to the ideal of data-intensive and digital-first universities of the 21st century. And this is where the work of Arthur D. Little remains important. Not going to spend a lot of time on that. I just want to make sure that we accept that things like focus on employability of students, leverage growing market segments, financial sustainability, maximize the research performance, these things remain core to what we are supposed to do as universities. We cannot abdicate these roles and these critical responsibilities. The question is, how are we going to do it, and how do we understand the context in terms of which we have to play this role? So understanding the university as an engaged entity, then in the new era. In the globalizing world, enabled by the digital impetus, powerful forces push universities to reinvent themselves. We don't argue that, we accept that. And they must change into strategic actors seeking autonomy, but not losing their relevance and accountability. And this remains the critical aspect around this. How do we make sure that what we do is significant enough to have impact? It competes for resources and recognition. Of course, that will happen. But in this process of change, higher education is challenged in terms of the value that it has. In other words, its ability to prepare students, leaders into engaged citizens and socially mature adults and critical thinkers. These are the basic ideas that we should keep on debating, because this is where our value contribution sits. New engaged universities function with and in recognition of its total context. Key aspects in constituting this engagement is firstly the fact that we should generate generations of students positive to contribute to the world around us and to serve its context. In other words, it's a new awareness, a new ethos. Promote and incentivize engaged scholarship in research, teaching, and engagement. We should commit to planning for and serving a higher purpose. In other words, improving human well-being, and specifically create institutional capacity to enable staff to build relations and engage. My argument remains, the focus is internal and external. So it's evident that faculty working in isolation become outdated. Engaged universities therefore adopt an explicit concern with achieving societal impact. They are increasingly involved in cooperation and knowledge exchange based on the new reality that we're talking about. The essence of the relationship between universities and their stakeholders rests on sustained partnership and reciprocity to enable effective ideation, invention, legitimization, and innovation. The university must therefore include a voice for the stakeholders and must make sure that it manifests in practice. That enables the engaged teaching that we're talking about, where we collaborate in curriculum decisions, where we prepare students for practice, and productive citizenship, advance and apply various forms of knowledge. We talk about engaged research and scholarship, which must be academically defined and socially accountable, but it incorporates reciprocal institutional and civic engagement. It must be systematic and rigorous and integrate theory into practice. Engaged service, of course, it's a partnership relationship. It is not a matter of driving, it is a matter of engaging justice, citizenship, and it is evident that the engaged university has to deal with its total reality, internal and external. How do we do that? And it's all in red for a very specific reason, that the university needs to understand that its context sits with government, with business, with the community, and with the rest of the academic fraternity. It is that relationship is based on its scholarship, its partnership, its reciprocality to enhance the relevance and the legitimacy. It's on this basis where we create innovative ideas. And this innovation then, because it carries the legitimacy, becomes the base on which we can develop society. So the technology enhancing engagement then, the responsibility of the university is to make sure that it uses technology progressively to facilitate this engagement. It uses this technology to enable reciprocality. It uses technology to enable its internal capacity, but also external partners to build that capacity to enable the opportunity to enhance the ability for more effective collaboration and sharing. So in this process, skills are developed across collaborative networks, and we are growing our ability to facilitate this type of networks. Do we have a choice? If we don't move, we become irrelevant, ivory towers, lack of resources, and lag behind. If we move too slow, industry will take over and have the monopoly of knowledge, and we will lose the common good and very expensive exchange of knowledge. The university as active partner should become the base to serve as a culmination point for knowledge. And it should facilitate the continuous common good purpose while it optimizes its ability to be scientifically active and facilitate learning and building of the environment. So in conclusion, the university has a crucial role to play in this process. It is designed to meet the needs of the past industrial revolution, which is not suited for the automation economy. We have a different demand from our students, not have the luxury of determining our role in isolation. We must rethink, and we must make sure that acceptability and legitimacy is the enabled definition, and the university should continue as common good. But the frame of reference now is the total context and all stakeholders, and not only the traditional engagement idea of getting involved in the community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Professor Louw. Very interesting presentation. Great changes await the academy. We'll deal with questions later. We now move to the panel discussion. We've got 3 colleagues who are going to respond. The first respondent will be Mr. Phila Sithole, who's joining us from the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies. And he will then be followed by Mr. Pretorius, who is Managing Director of Higher Education Information Technology South Africa at the Northwest University. And the last respondent will be Professor Keet. So these are the colleagues who will be helping us with the panel discussion. Colleagues, just a reminder, each one of you have 8 minutes to give your response, and I'll give you just 3 minutes before your 8 minutes are over. I'll give you a signal by switching on the video. Over to you, Mr. Sithole.
Thank you very much, Chair Ramogale, and also to the panel and Prof. Marwala, and to the wonderful speaker, Prof. Ben Anderson, who has started with the discussion that we are in, and also as well the second speaker as well, Prof. Alwyn. The first question that was raised is first by Prof. Marwala, that we need to integrate into the cyberspace as the world we know is normal. Now, do we currently define the world we are going to in the context of how we should be able to conduct our work, how we should be able to learn, and also how the future of our kids will look like as we integrate into the cyberspace? The answer is no. And this is because if you look over the past few years, were you able to predict where we will be today? Given the COVID situation, we know we are in a different world altogether. Of course, if you pass the river the second time, you are not going to be the same anymore. But what person we will be when we cross the river the second time, we are not able to define at this stage of what tomorrow holds for us. But for sure, one thing is that we can prepare for the future, that in the dimensions in which we are able to define the space where we find ourselves. The second one is the algorithmic dance. Now, the question here is, as humans, we have been struggling to dance with nature. And how can we now dance with technology? Have we been able to master living harmony with nature. And there is common thread that is common to all of us in terms of where we find ourselves in the fourth industrial revolution. How can we dance with technology? For the first time, human, our nature comes in and say, we will not be able to manage the future of work. We will be displaced. We are on the defense because technology will be taking over. And we are forced to learn to dance with technology, even though we have not been able in the past to dance with the environment that we find ourselves in. Technology has an upper hand. It defines where, how we do things, how we socialize, how we commute, how we order our food, and how we learn. Of course, there is a great learning that we can have. There is a great role of a university that needs to play a part. It cannot abdicate its role in terms of owning of knowledge. What is very key is that we need to have and engage universities that are engaging with business, that are engaging with community, engaging with government, to be in the center of defining the context in which we need to live and also define our space. Of course, there are obstacles that we are aware of. There is key responsibilities in terms of government. What we have defined so far in the strategy going forward, also in one of the key report for the fourth industrial revolution, is that South Africa will be a global, competitive, inclusive, shared economy with technological capability, with production capacity that is driven by the people harnessing the fourth industrial revolution to propel the country forward towards its socio-economic development. And this is the key common thing, that we need our people to be prosperous. We need our country to have an inclusive economy where we are in defining of our destiny, not technology defining our destiny as a people. But there is also, in terms of opportunity, to say, should we then hold control in terms of how our work in the future should be? Is it not maybe perhaps an opportunity for us to define our true aspiration as the human species, where we define what is really work? That should be defined by what is really our true individual talents that should contribute to the true environment where we want to live in. We don't live in an environment where work that doesn't bring our true joy and our true harmony should be, the order of the day, that we just live to work just to survive, and we are in an environment where we are in a cycle where we are caught in. What is very key is that we should have human-centered intervention, which develop people's skills in the 4IR ecosystem, promoting human rights, ensuring that our people are safe in the cyberspace. Environmental protection should be key as principal guideline to guide our intervention in preparing for the future of work. Economic focus is key where we find ourselves. A country like South Africa, where we have an economy which doesn't create job opportunities, we need to have that intervention and making sure that technology drives our economy development. We are also being able to be competitive. Previously, South Africa, we have not done well in terms of our education, basic education system. And now in the fourth industrial revolution, we have an opportunity where we can come together as government, university communities to ensure that education is accessible. We have accessible to knowledge, to those who want to be reskilled, to those who have fallen on the sidelines where there is no job opportunities and they are able to be reskilled for the job market. And in the center, universities are key to ensure that we are able to define the space being human-centered and to ensure that we prosper in the fourth industrial revolution as a people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Tola, for your response. I'm not sure, Nora, if there are any questions in the chat box. If we do have questions, if there aren't, I may maybe just...
There is, Chair. There's one question. Professor Baxen will share the question.
Yes, Chair. The question is, how can we as academia use the traditional lens of learning to empower communities during engagements? There are actually two questions. And I think it was, the second is, to what extent are universities appreciative of communities' ways of knowledge generation as being part of the scientific project? I have actually also copied and pasted into our session, Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Beckman.
Can you see the question, Chair? Are you able to see it?
We can see the question. Yeah. Professor Louw, you've unmuted.
Yeah,
do you want to give a response?
Chair, my sense is that, you know, although we're talking about engaged institutions, we've been involved in engagement in a very traditional way in the past. And it was often more a one-directional process of engagement and not an understanding of the context in which we facilitate this type of learning. So I think, you know, the traditional approach from higher educations is still something that we must grow out of. And I want to use the concept ivory tower type of orientation, where we basically had the power to decide. My argument is that the university should appreciate the context, and this is why my point is that the engaged university of the future is an entity that must take note of all the stakeholders in the context, and then this in a mutual on the basis of mutual understanding, define the future and the way in which we support a type of learning that will prepare people for participation into the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Anderson?
Yeah, just a short comment. I think in my frame, if you talk about engagement, the two critical constructs is how you manage people and how you manage innovation. Because our research has shown over the past 30 years in work that we've been doing, that if you do that, you become more engaged and more self-directed. Myself as the specialist, that I not look at my students as the people that I so to call serve, but that we are in a cooperative sense working as co-creators. And I think we're struggling with this.
Okay, quite interesting. Listening to the two presentations that you've made, gentlemen, plus Mr. Sithole's response, there's something that I see as a common thread, something that has serious implications for for universities. For those of us who are in university management, it's something that we need to grapple with. And I just want to get your sense of what is likely to happen. There's a view that with these technological changes, the future of the university as an employer is going to change, in the sense that the professors that we hire, that we employ, will serve more like consultants, and they will sell their expertise to any university. So they will not be attached to one particular university as an employee. They'll become independent consultants, and a university becomes more or less like a platform, you know, where students and those who teach meet. But the people who do the teaching are free to move around. So if you have a brilliant teacher or professor of mathematics, he or she will make that expertise available to students at UCT, students at the University of Venda, and so on and so on. And so we are being told we have to be prepared for this kind of a future. You see that as a likely scenario in the immediate future?
Chairperson, if I may, this is a practice already existing. A specific university that I'm involved with, talking about 10X, where they use the most brilliant lecturers, and they make that material available across the world. So that is a practice already existing in the world of work in terms of the new way of contracting and engagement. It is a matter of optimizing the capacity available, and people will contract and they will involve themselves in specific initiatives more and more across boundaries. So I think openness around new ways of engagement. Where I come from at the moment and where I'm working, our contract staff already, is in a ratio of probably about 120 to 130% of our full-time staff.
Wow, that's very interesting. Okay, quite interesting. All right, thanks a lot, colleagues. Let's move to the next respondent, Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen, then I'm going to switch off my video. My name is Pretorius, so I'm actually wearing two hats today. The one is, my primary hat is the Director of IT at Northwest University, and my secondary hat is Managing Director of HEITSA. Now, HEITSA serves as a unitary voice for the South African higher education IT profession. I am responding and will be sharing an IT perspective on the new technology moment and society. Now, remember, it is specifically an IT perspective. So when in March last year, all of us know, COVID struck, and we had to quickly respond. And we were in crisis mode for quite some time. But at the same time, we said, okay, we have to recover and restore what we had previously. And again, at the same time, but not with a lot of activity, we have to rebuild and renew as well. So typically, what we did with the response, there was actually two things that we had to enable, and that was emergency remote learning, and of course to enable work from home. Now, emergency remote learning, there were a lot of things that we had to do. The LMS, for instance, the first thing is 24/7 availability, 20,000 students, concurrent students working on it. So it was a huge responsibility from IT side to keep everything going, provide e-assessment platforms, new platforms that we haven't had before, virtualization of applications, to provide PC lab applications to students working from anywhere on any device, training, video production, voice over PowerPoint, all these kind of things we haven't done before. And of course, lecture capture and many more. To enable work from home, especially in terms of security, that was a huge issue. So we had to make virtual environments available like VPN. We have to support these people remotely. which we haven't really done before. And then, of course, we had to provide all these technology platforms that people communicate with these days, and that's Zoom and Teams and so on. In terms of recovery, I'm not going to say a lot about that. It depends. Every university is on a different, on the x-axis, in a different mode at the moment. But the recovery, it means you improve your efficiency and productivity, and you look at digital business optimization. But I think the most important thing, the era that we're now in, is strategy reset and business model changes and digital business strategy, which is an opportunity for us, but also a risk. If you look at what Harvard Business Review says, education is one of the least digitized and most people-intensive economic sectors, suggesting that the opportunity for and risk of technology-driven disruptions is strong. Following a slow two-decade march towards more digital business models, higher education technological transformation has been rapidly accelerating by the events of 2020 and centers more than ever on technology and analytics-driven online learning experiences and new business models. So the most important thing here is centers more than ever on technology, but it remains a risk and an opportunity. So what has changed and what is changing? Now, if you don't know the hype cycle of Gartner, most technologies go through these phases. There's an innovation trigger, there's a peak of inflated expectations, lots of hype. Then it goes through the trough of disillusionment. Lots of technologies with hype. When you have hype and you have to implement something, you tend to get some problems that you didn't know will hit you. So that is a trough of disillusionment. And then you get more mature, so they're on a slope of enlightenment, and then the plateau of productivity. Now, a few of them, like adaptive learning platforms, for instance, they dynamically adjust the way instructional content is presented to students based on their response or preferences. Now, this is an important thing because the question is, what is the future role of the traditional LMS? Is it going to change? Is it going to fall away? Will we have the traditional LMS in future? Digital credentials, the digitalization of traditional diplomas, micro-credentials, certification, and other qualifications via a secure framework to capture and present achievements that are verifiable. So we can go through them. We all know about educational analytics, digital assessments. Blockchain is a very interesting one. It could optimize and transform our education record keeping. It can put learners in charge of their own portfolios without third parties to verify them. I think the most hyped one at the moment is the HiFlex classrooms, where collaborative teaching spaces that allow faculty to teach students on campus and online at the same time. All are seen and heard synchronously. This will always, of course, be balanced with asynchronous activities. Now, the diversity, equity, and inclusion in society, I think where we come in as IT leaders and as HEITSA is in terms of access that we've done in the past year, providing of data packages, zero rating and reverse billing devices, making devices available to students, virtual applications, support call centers and so on, and VPNs. And then access ongoing, and that is an interesting one, is to expand free access to the Sandrin network, that is the university network, via Eduroam, for instance, to all public libraries working with tertiary education networks, that's TENET. And then, of course, building partnerships, providing shared services like, for instance, security scorecard, and then making software affordable and accessible to everyone, every university and every student by doing collaborative procurement. So we have lots of plans. and ideas and have executed on many of them. If we don't move now, we will become irrelevant. Some of the previous speakers have said that, and I believe in that as well. I thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pretorius. Do we have a question or a comment at this stage?
Chair, there was a question earlier which was posted, not for the immediate respondent.
So we will deal with it after the third respondent.
I think that might be best, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you very much. Let's then move to the third respondent, and that will be the last one, Professor Keet.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thanks, colleagues, for great presentations from Marwala, Louw, and Anderson as well, and of course the respondents as well. Chair, if I stick to my 8 minutes, I see two tracks, of arguments coming through. The one is on technology, the university and society, and then the other track is on the digital transformation of the university. So those two tracks, though they are connected, they are not the same, and they do not, work on the same assumptions. So around those questions, I then would like to engage the two speakers. The first one would then be, from Prof. Anderson's side, the tension in the logic of the algo and the andro, given the fact that you present the coded reality in such a totalizing way, how would that dance that you are proposing be possible? Because if you are not softening your argument on the totalizing, permeation of a coded reality via technological advancements, that dance would be an impossible one, given the place where humanity is at the moment. I would like for you to consider whether that particular tension is not framed in such a stark way that makes the logic of your proposal an impossibility. So that's the first one. Even with all those megatrends that you are putting forward, of course, you would like to argue for the interface between innovation and the human, but one will have to make that logical jump between that coded reality and the context of the human. Prof. Louw, in your presentation, of course, the idea of the university having to develop its public good function, more or less, not even protected, because it's very difficult to think of universities as already having that public good function at a systemic global level, given the discussions we had yesterday. But whilst it has to protect that public good orientation, it has to, of course, embrace. And I really am in support and like your argument about how we deploy technology-enhanced engagement to release and unburden our internal capacity for better collaborations with society in that space. That formulation is very, very useful. And of course, the interplay between the internal and the external. But there are a couple of little, what one we call red lights, on my dashboard. The one would be, is that in a presentation yesterday, that covers the global research themes from 2016 to 2020, within the higher education transformation space, the interface between digital transformation, distance education, ICT now, as per Boeta's presentation as well, and technology within the university on the one hand, and the one on social transformation, social justice, equity, gender, race, inclusivity on the other hand. That schism is so wide, there is not even a tangible connection between those two different sets of transformation. Here again, Ben, your dance is people are going to fall over each other's feet in relation to your dance. I would like to just find hope in that makes that particular dance possible, because our empirical data doesn't show that particular platform emerging. That's the one. Then the other one is as an invitation to a conversation, of course. The one is that whether the fourth industrial revolution and technological advances in the way that we are framing it is not already setting up the university as a utility or as a company, Prof. Louw, meaning that the language that is deployed more or less undercut already the public good advancements that you think the university should be making. Like Ben, you know, if you just deploy the ideas of the network, innovation, online creativity, disruption, change, those are the master terms of the company, and those are the master terms of capital accumulation, and now those are the master terms of our digital transformation as well. So where are we going to find this public good university in the deployment of those master terms as well, which of course is being used to legitimize you know, various sets of neoliberal developments within the university? And against that backdrop, you know, how would the network and the online be problematized in such a way, Prof. Louw, to protect the public good imperative of the university and at the same time embrace technological advances so that we can unburden the resident capacities that we already have as complex institutions? Chair, those are my engagement with the two speakers. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
I would like to respond, Chair.
Yes, Professor Anderson, there were questions directed at you. You can respond.
Maybe just to some of them.
It's a conversation with both speakers, Chair. Okay. I'd love to hear Prof. Louw as well.
I think the notion of a cooperative engagement seems to me, in my experience in both the academic and business world, is foreign to both contexts. We have not done well as a people to cooperatively engage. So if we can do the dance, knowing that we indeed are falling over our feet, we may step back and say, how can we rejuvenate this algo and algorithmic engagement? And in a cooperative space, there is not a motive for capitalism per se. There's a motive for what the people in the knowledge network decide what is meaningful. So ideally in the cooperative space, there's no preconceived notion of what would be the nomenclature, so to speak. And I think that's why conversations like these are very good. How ready are we to appreciate that we all, both in the corporate and in the education world, have actually not served the public good in the way we could have? And how can we enhance that? We believe that the dance between technology and humanity provides us with a great opportunity to accept all the things that we could not achieve, but hopefully achieve them in a different way. So those are just sort of a comment that I wanted to add without going into much detail.
Okay. Thanks, Professor Anderson. Professor Louw?
Thank you very much, André. This is the time when I typically long to be in South Africa to sit around the table and talk about these things, you know. The first instance for me is that I think we, to a large extent, and we've learned this lesson specifically now with COVID and the transition, which we, of course, all of us had to do very swiftly, is the way in which, you know, we try to make things accessible almost in a mechanical manner to maintain the current operation and to maintain the current trend of providing higher education and involving people. In that process, there was not a consistent consideration of what are we really talking about when we argue that someone will not be able to travel or someone will not be able to access a specific facility. And then all of a sudden realize, but we're expecting for people to work online, but they do not have, firstly, access to technology or the skills or the ability to use that technology effectively. So the point that I'm making is that on the one hand, we sit with technology as an instrument that we use to solve a problem, but we're not consistent in terms of the approach that we follow to say, how do we enable participation in a way that will be continuously developmental? So if we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and this is why I'm very cautious in going into, a debate, although acknowledging the importance of understanding it, but going into a strategic discussion and into a debate, accepting the esoteric part of the opportunity. I'm really trying to be very consistent in terms of what is the reality in terms of the key role players and the elements that we should consider in designing a solution for a specific situation. And for that reason, a basic argument in terms of all stakeholders in the process. If we consider the position that's being taken by Google and IBM, and for the first time, I never realized that IBM already awarded 3.5 million of its badges and its certificates. And if we take see what is happening with Google at the moment. So the whole process of facilitating learning and creating opportunities is moving away from university in terms of mass provision. They're actually functioning next to the accreditation system. So a lot of new things are happening around this at the moment. So if the fourth industrial revolution and the technology becomes available, enable that type of scenario, it's moving away from the ethos that we typically see is necessary for an effective learning environment. So the argument is real. And this is why my last question when I asked, the point was, how do we make sure that humans still remain centered in the process of enabling the use of technology towards improving the well-being of people? So argument for me is that I think universities do not have an option, but it will have to finally move out of this environment where it predetermines, the way in which it look at the reality. It will have to understand that the interpretation is a collaborative opportunity. It will have to understand that the solution is reciprocal, and it will have to understand that the ability to have impact will be a co-definition of the outcome.
Yeah.
I think, these things for me are the important concepts that we need to keep in the debate. Keep our feet very squarely on the ground, understanding who the role players are and what the needs are, and then make sure that we understand the potential of the new technology to enhance the productivity and the ability of people to achieve more. And based on that understanding of the potential, we can make sure that we build the capacity to continue to use technology and not being enslaved by it.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Professor Louw. We do have some questions, Professor Baxen. Can you just share those questions that you've got?
Yes, Chair, they in the chat. The very first one, which we haven't fully engaged with, is often thinking around the role of university in the new digital looks to the capabilities of current and future students. What is the role? Oh, I think we've done that one. What is the role of incapacitating citizens outside the academic programs, those not in universities and those who have studied some years earlier? So that's one. Then
could I respond to that one, Professor Baxton?
Go ahead.
Maybe I want to oversimplify it, but I recall when I did my PhD, I did some work in looking what happened at Oxford, and I was amazed, if we can look at it from a coded perspective, that in the 1500s, Oxford University had the technology to make people aware of how to use language, be that in the English language, in a proficient way. So Oxford's faculty in non-formal accredited, for, if I may use that language, non-formalized programs, Oxford faculty went to the mines, the coal mines, and actually taught people how to use the English language. Now that to me is a technology. Language, the written articulate language at that point was a new technology, because until such time, only the church leaders or some few individuals could read and write. So to me, the answer is in a way very simple. And to what Prof. Alwyn also said, we have to move out of our comfort zone. We come from a history of privilege at universities. And in some way, I think we've lost our roots. And we've lost the notion of co-creating and paying forward and sharing. So I would hope that as part of our strategic intent and our agenda towards the future, that we will just simply step into the world. Just step into the world. They need us. We need each other.
Chair, if I may just make one brief remark on that. I think we must also get out of this old idea of we're educating people, in the community. I think it is a matter of a broad mobilization of community in terms of the broader development. And in this engagement around development issues, we transfer and make sure that technology and the inclusion of technology and the capacity to use that effectively becomes part of the broader engagement in society. So it's not a matter of these little structured programs of bringing 50 people into an evening class. I think those days are really not, in my book, not relevant anymore. I think we must think much bigger in terms of the way in which we build capacity while we grow.
Yeah. Okay, quite interesting. There's a question for Mr. Pretorius. Mr. Pretorius, the question, why do you think higher education has not embraced technology as part of its delivery methodology? Okay,
could I respond on that one?
Okay, yes.
I think part of it is, it's also a generation thing here. I saw it in my own institution that, we struggled to embrace change. Technology was a definite step change. And unfortunately, the younger generation, if you have younger students, are very much into technology. And COVID has forced the faculty to go into that space. But in all honesty, many faculty are not comfortable with the notion of making technology an integral part. So I think we must be, I'm almost sensitive towards this matter. It so happened that it's a new way of thinking even that's required if you engage technology in the full sense. And I think we need a transition. This is tough for many people.
Yeah. Okay, colleagues, it's 13:10. Professor Baxen, you've got your hand up.
Sure, it's not. I was supposed to be moderator only, but this is a fascinating discussion, and I really do want to thank the presenters and the respondents for thought-provoking deliberations. I think for me, and maybe just one last thought, is commitment to any technologically driven methodology has to include commitment to resources, to technological resources. And one of the things that we saw that had major implications for how universities were able to respond last year was the lack or the unevenness in the resource base of our student population. And when I talk about resources, I'm not just talking about the hard and software. I'm also talking about a way of being in a technologically driven society, and the competencies and skills that are required to navigate in a very different way. I think what COVID-19 did is it really made us question our roles as knowledge purveyors. It made us question the role of students as self-directed individuals and collectives, and how one has to recalibrate in this social environment where one does not necessarily have the luxury of presence. And so thinking about what presence means in a technologically driven pedagogical space, I think is complex and one that we need to engage with. I think in the pedagogical environment, it requires a very deliberate interface between thinking about roles and the technology that is made available to students and staff. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our session. Professor Louw, Professor Anderson, just in 15 seconds, any closing remarks? Can we start with Professor Louw?
Yeah, Chair, there's no doubt we're living in an age of the biggest opportunity that we could have imagined. The principle is, how do we understand what is busy developing, and how do we interpret the opportunity of making an impact in this context?
Thank you. Professor
Yeah,
Anderson?
I want to agree and say there's so much energy around us. The fact that we may be in discomfort, let's embrace each other. Let's embrace each other at all levels, and let's work towards a common good and charter a new way of thinking. You know, I think that it allows us, the technology with the human interface has opened up a new level of engagement. And I want to say, let's all partake. We don't need to be the champions at first. Let's just walk the journey.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right, thank you very much. There is this brave new world that is before us. Let's embrace it. I think that is the message coming out of this session. Thank you very much, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We have come to the end of this session.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all your participation and the questions.